Welcome back to the Patient Podcast. And first things first, to state the obvious, Katie is not going to be in this episode, but should be joining us again in the next episode. But don't despair, we do have Mohammed Wazway, or as I like to call him, Ish. We've known each other about, I think, nearly 2 years now. Welcome, Ish. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me, Kieran. I'm doing all right, thank you.
Good, good. Right. So we just launch into this and just like explain to folks who might not already know who patients can are. Can you just give us a bit of a rundown of what patients can do, what you've been doing? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So, Patients Can is a non-profit organization led by patients. Our main aim is to empower patients and support them through their treatment journey. But more importantly, I think Patients Can is a tool for patients to ensure that they are well informed and that they're prepared for anything with their healthcare or with society in general. That's my delivery for our
That's your
medication.
meds. That's no worries. So we
Bear
know
with
you
me.
had to pull. And while we wait for Ish to pick up his medicine, I want to let you know that in the middle of this podcast, you will see that we will have a bit of a break in which hopefully Ish will be able to try some of his meds that have just come in the mail. I'll be able to try some of my meds that have just come in the mail. We'll have a bit more of a frank conversation, but you will only see that if you're a member of the channel and click the join button below. Now back to the podcast. Sorry, you were just saying what it is that a patient can does.
We aim to empower patients through support and education. It's not just a platform for patients to volunteer and actively engage in activities to better improve the community and the space, but it's also a tool to ensure that patients are well informed throughout their treatment journey. But what we've achieved over the few years that we've existed is that we've created a great platform with plenty of resource and information for patients. We've got guidance on use of prescription at work, use of prescription in private places, in public places, traveling on the train, by plane, all sorts of different things. And on top of that, we've also conducted a medical cannabis roadshow campaign since last year with over a dozen events aiming to raise awareness and normalize cannabis as a medicine because people still don't know cannabis is legal and it's pretty crazy.
Absolutely. Important work. So, of course, yourself, you are a patient. You've just received your meds in the mail today. I wanted you to, we had a little bit of a talk beforehand just about how I wanted this to be a very frank conversation. I've invited yourself on today because I want patients to have much more of a voice in this space. And I want to ask you, how do you feel the current landscape? So the current legal landscape, the current structure in the UK fits for people who are just trying to, seek out this medicine?
Restrictive at the moment, although I'd say access is still available to the majority of people in the UK. You know, with only a few prescriptions handed out through the NHS. But we've seen tens of thousands of patients, receiving it privately, and it's growing. But there are some barriers that are preventing patients from actually receiving this treatment. So, for example, cannabis is seen as a last resort treatment. So I think this current landscape, it's improving. It's still got a lot of teething problems, and I think access can improve if awareness also improves. That's for both the
Yeah,
public and healthcare professionals.
absolutely. I completely agree. I do apologize if it is getting picked up for any of our viewers. That there might just be some stability issues with connection at the moment. But just to touch on one of the points you're making specifically about like it being too restrictive, I like completely agree because I was fortunate in myself that fortunate in the fact that I had tried a number of other medications that proved quite harmful for me on the NHS, but I've got friends who have similar conditions but have never told their doctors or ever sought out like medication on the NHS, and so they can't get a prescription, but they've been using cannabis for a really long time and know that it works, perfectly well to help their condition. So it doesn't really fit the mold of patients who are not, like myself, cannabis naive, that who do know that cannabis works for them, but they've just not sought any enough treatments to qualify for medical cannabis.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it does put those patients in a limbo. I mean, with our awareness campaign, we've been able to speak to a lot of individuals, and many of whom who have tried cannabis before or are, self-medicating. And a lot of them either have trust issues with the current healthcare system, or the pharmaceutical medicines that are available to them. So that's why they haven't taken those steps, and that they've relied on the cannabis treatment instead. And they found that to work, and they've, kept with that. Whereas if they see this, when we approach them and tell them, look, cannabis is available on prescription, but you need to follow these steps first, they kind of think, well, do I need to go to the doctor now and try all of these treatments, try all of these medications? What position am I in? So it kind of puts a lot of people in a hard spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
it would be a lot easier if it wasn't that restrictive.
On that like subject of being in a hard spot as a patient, I mean, we were just talking about it earlier, but you've been, waiting some time to get your medication. Today, I was going just myself a similar situation, struggling for the past couple of weeks to get mine, or just hoping that it would be in stock by the time that the prescription got to the pharmacy. I mean, can you tell us a bit about that? I mean, your experience perhaps, or have you seen this similar experience with many other patients? Do you think this current system is fitting to provide for those patients?
I don't. I mean, it's really difficult because we're in a financial crisis at the moment, and I personally am, finding it difficult with my own financial issues, and it's not been great because I've not had a fulfilling treatment, and I've had to rely on the illicit market just to ensure that I'm having a fulfilled treatment. But with my prescription, I felt that, at least I have some legal protection while I'm doing that. But at the same time, I knew that, this isn't fully protected, and I'm doing something that could possibly be, wrong, or could, jeopardize my treatment in it as a whole. So I've seen that with many other patients as well. It's not an easy environment to be in. A lot of people are using all of the money that they have, that they're receiving through benefits, or that they're, whatever money that they're receiving, they're having to put into this prescription, which is costing them, from around £500 to almost £1,000 a month, which is a lot. And when you have issues like stock issues, or you've got problems where patients aren't finding the products that are working for them, and then their options then become very limited, and then those products either go out of stock or non-existent, it just makes even more challenges as well, especially for people who are finding those that don't have that financial freedom to maybe choose something that's a bit more expensive, and that might still work for them.
And all of this that we're talking about at the minute, I say, would probably fit into what are the kind of established rules around, or the regulations, I should say, around prescribing medical cannabis. They've kind of been, correct me if I'm wrong, already been kind of put out since 2018. That's kind of how it was originally structured. But recently, I think we've been seeing kind of more guidance and recommendations kind of coming from, because of potentially, because, and this might be the reason, correct me if I'm wrong, if you disagree, the more attention that medical cannabis has been getting, and the more patients we've been getting, there's been a lot more attention from, like, let's just say that I might have to bleep these out later, but like the Clinician Society, the CIC, the maybe all of this is getting bleeped. The let's think the MHRA, the MPCC, all of these people are kind of interpreting the law and regulations themselves and putting out these extra guidances and recommendations. I feel are kind of like making it even more restrictive for patients. How do you feel about that?
I think what we as patients need to remember is that as much as we're like, especially those people that are used to what cannabis, I think we're all used to what cannabis used to be, right? Before it became medical cannabis, especially in the UK. But we need to remind ourselves that it's prescription cannabis, right? Medical cannabis is easy to just say, oh, yes, for medicinal use, that this is prescription cannabis. So basically, it's like any other prescription medicine. It's going to have the same regulations as any other prescription medicine. And we would want to expect that as well, right? We want it to be treated like any other prescription medicine. So the the regulations that are in place through by the MHRA, right, or the government, it's nothing new aside from things that are specific to what cannabis actually is, like the strain names and the certain compounds and content, right? But we have individual bodies within the industry who I feel out of fear are making harsh recommendations, which have, I personally feel, have no founded evidence to back it up. And even within its own guidance, it even says research is limited. I I feel like a lot of this is coming from the fact that this industry has been left to its own device, and some
It's
parts of the industry are
trying to
kind of,
self-regulate.
yeah, we have been left to self-regulate though, haven't we? This whole industry has, this whole space has, patients are self-regulating each other. It's just this, it's the government has given up because the reason why cannabis is legal was because they had to legalize it, and they don't want it to be legal. So this goes back to me, saying, like, emphasizing on the fact that this is prescription cannabis. There is this almost pseudo rec market that some industry members are talking about, which is being developed in this community, industry, because we don't have legal cannabis or recreational cannabis available yet, and there are individuals who are trying to push for it. But we've got to remember this is prescription cannabis, and that's not the space for it, right? And it's so easy for us to forget. But I think that's personally the issue. I think we're getting scared that the industry are stepping in, but they're only stepping in to
I
create
think it's like you
rules.
say, it's based off of fear. I think there's a fear amongst certain members of the industry that have potentially more sway, that it's going to be potentially abused, like you say, into a pseudo recreational market, which is a term that I've only really been recently hearing a lot. And I think it's bred out of that fear, like you said, that people are going to abuse the system. But I just think that it's adding more fear by creating these further restrictions that you're, for example, to get more specific, there is a recent kind of recommendation that's been floating around, that to prove your legality of being a patient, you must provide proof of a prescription that is dated within the previous, or prescription or letter from your doctor that's dated within the previous 90 days, which is not based on any kind of regulations or law. It's based on NPCC guidance, that is interpretations of the law. But they're only adding that interpretation. To me, it seems, and I've asked the question to other patients. My wife has used other prescription drugs that are controlled drugs. It doesn't seem that these extra restrictions are being added onto any other drug other than cannabis. It feels very targeted, and it feels like, for example, yes, you might potentially dissuade somebody that may be using the legal prescription market as a pseudo recreational market, but you may also be potentially jeopardizing patients. Like, say, again, sorry to keep bringing my wife into this, but I don't take oil. She is prescribed oil. She sometimes buys that in a couple of bottles at a time. She doesn't want to pay the repeat prescription fees, so she'll buy a few bottles. And sometimes she'll get to month 4 and she'll haven't have finished that third bottle. That prescription's out of 90 days, but there's no reason in law or regulation that says that that prescription is no longer valid, that she's no longer entitled to be in possession of that medicine. Sorry. So if that information is being fed back to police, I don't want to try and conflate it with being as dangerous as something like, in my opinion, CanCard, but you're potentially confusing officers even further.
One thing that we need to consider as well on that is that, say, for example, a patient has changed clinic and they have medication from their previous clinic, they are still entitled to that, even if, like, however long it's been, right? And these recommendations, like you said, it does creates a stigma. It creates misinformation for police officers, like you said, and it just creates more fear for patients as well. You know, not everyone's going to need to use their entire medication throughout the month, you know, especially if we're forced to get 10 grams each month, right? And that 10 grams is useless. It doesn't work for us. It's maybe just a little, you know, it works a little bit. Maybe if we mix it with another product, it might, you know, last a little bit longer. It might work just a bit better, that sort of stuff. So if that's the case, you know, what about patients who aren't having to use their medication? Are they required to just throw it away if it doesn't work, but it still has, you know, some sort of efficacy? Or, you know, what's going to happen, you know, for patients that are wasting their money doing that? So I think it is all these regulations, especially when it's not coming from the law itself, is creating more stigma, and it's really depressing when it's coming from within our own community.
Yeah, very much so. Yes, I think there's been a recent kind of, I don't know, just change in the air, kind of, or not a divide. I try not to, you know, I sometimes worry that we are getting a little too into these like nitty gritty subjects and not like just focusing on the big picture, which is that we all want, which should hopefully want greater access to cannabis. But yeah, there does seem, like I say, there does seem to be a split of some that are quite fearful, and it's leading to a lot of stigma and a lot of decisions being made that are potentially not in my opinion, the patient's best interest. It's rather that member of the industry's interests.
Yeah, of course. And to be honest with you, I don't think we need to hide it really. It's quite obvious, you know, and
Yeah.
I think we should really be pointing them out, you know,
Okay.
like, and calling them out, because honestly, these aren't the people we want to be around. We don't want in our industry, you know, we
Mm-hmm.
don't need people who are looking for money. We want people who are actually supporting patients, you know, and what's really depressing is that money is going towards marketing organizations, promoting them in such a way, and it's very narrow marketing when it could be expanded in such a way that it could have like bigger impact, you know, going to the right people. When things are online, we have algorithms and things which are
Mm-hmm.
keeping us in our narrow path. So a lot of these people aren't seeing what's going on.
There's a lot of people that are in this for personal reasons, which I think is great, and then there's people that are in this for financial reasons, who say it's personal.
Like, I'm glad that I'm working in the medical cannabis industry, but I really would love to like grow my own.
If this was decriminalized, I'd be that guy sat in a social club trimming up the bud for free labor
Yeah.
just to take a couple of grams home with me.
Okay, there's one thing I want to talk about, and that's
Go ahead, please.
irradiation.
Go ahead. Let's talk about it a bit more frankly and a bit more specifically. So, I mean, we've mentioned some of them already, but you know, there's recent recommendations that have been put out by you know, the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society that you know instructs you know. I mean, can you talk about this? Do you know a little bit more, perhaps, than I do? I don't want to.
Yeah, so
Is there anything in there that I've read a few things, and personally, I think again, it's adding to that fear and stigma. But how do you feel? What's specifically in there? Do you have concerns about, if any?
I completely agree. It definitely has stigmatized language in my opinion. It's certain things, certain words like experienced patients is used a lot, and it kind of bunches, you know, certain people, or like it bunches a load of people into one category, and it really has that stigmatized language, and it's not nice. Like I said earlier, it's depressing that it's coming from within our own community, right?
So some of
And
the recommendations, do you know what they are? I know one of which would limit the amount of grams that a patient could be prescribed on a
yeah,
daily
so
amount.
I've got a note here of some of the recommendations. So they say anything over 2 grams requires peer approval, and
Mm-hmm.
anything over 22% requires peer approval.
Mm-hmm.
And within that recommendation, it literally says research is limited,
Mm-hmm.
yet they will recommend 22% as a cap, and anything before above that should be peer reviewed. I mean, it would be okay if the quality of products that are below 22% are sufficient enough for patients not to have to require stronger products. Because within that same guide, it says, you know, products that are at 30% or, you know, higher than 22% are least likely to have the compounds which are going to be effective. But if we have products that are coming in at below 22% and that smell like hay, have very little to no terpenes, or probably any of the other volatile compounds that create the entourage effect, then what do you expect patients to do? They are going to go for the higher THC products to ensure that they're getting the effects they need to relieve their symptoms.
Yeah.
So
And just
it's,
to add context here, so anybody might be lost here. The Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society it's a clinician society that was set up, I believe, by Professor Mike Barnes. I'm not saying that this was specifically written by him, but it was put out by the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, which was recommendations that they recommended to their clinicians on how to with guidance on how to prescribe. So yeah, please carry on. I mean, like I said, this is concerning for me. It may not be a big deal for some patients. I understand. Maybe it doesn't affect you in the site, but it's concerning for me because I'm one of those patients. I'll just say it. I'm prescribed 2 grams daily. I'm trying to bring that down every day. But it's and sometimes there's just medications that I don't care about the percentages. It's the like you say, it's the terpenes that really uh, are on my mind when choosing what medicine to consider for that month. So please, sorry, carry on.
exactly. I mean, and going back to that 2 grams maximum, I mean, personally, I'm supposed to be on 2 to 3 grams maximum. And for me, it really depends on the THC that I consume as well. So if
Mhm.
I go for a higher THC product, I'll probably use a lot less. Um, and my choice of THC again goes onto that point of the entourage effect. Am I getting the quality that I need with these lower THC products, or is it working for me? No, it's not. I'm probably gonna have to go for a higher THC product just so that I get some sort of efficacy. But also it goes on to the point that they've I've noted down here, they've said on average most individuals are prescribed 1 gram maximum daily, and approximately 10% of patients are prescribed 2 grams daily. I'd like to know um, where they got this information from. But at the same time, have they considered the fact that patients are also living through this cost of living crisis? That a lot of these patients may just be getting what they need to stay legal, and that burden of criminality is taken off their shoulder.
Mhm.
Are these considered? Because for me personally as well, I had to reduce my intake to 1 gram maximum daily, and I'll be open. Like my last prescription was for 10 grams for that entire month because I couldn't afford any more. So for me, it doesn't make sense when I see that they're able to say, oh yeah, the average people are taking 1 gram and then 10% are 2 grams. It doesn't make sense to me. We're not in a space to be able to confidently say that this is the case with the vast majority of patients, and this is the case with everyone's treatment plan. That's
Yeah.
not this, it doesn't work, and nobody around the whole entire world is able to agree with this. No other country has ever stated this. There's no evidence anywhere
Yeah.
agreeing to this. So in all honesty, I'm disappointed.
Yeah.
And I don't accept the fact that, patients should be put into this one category of being an experienced patient, who are trying to manipulate the whole system, and that's all they are. If you're an experienced patient, you're only there to manipulate the industry and to take advantage of it. You're only there to get for the high THC and for as much weed as you can get, which is
And
not the case.
we seem to forget who it was. It's this was started because people who couldn't get the medicine they needed the medicine, and they were sourcing it from sources that were not legal. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think one thing I need to highlight as well is that the recommendation is mainly for prescribing of flower,
Yeah.
and the one for oil is non-existent at the moment.
Yeah, that's something I kind of sort of was a little strange. Why do we not seem to have any of these sort of restrictions for capsules, for oh, there's a number of
Vape
different things.
pens,
Cartridges, like
yeah.
gummies, like all these different medicines that were prescribed that are all derived through cannabis. Where's the restrictions for them? They're ultimately can be prescribed in high THC amounts as well. It seems very targeted at flower, like you said.
It definitely does, and I think it goes back to that thing where we said it's fear.
Mhm.
And a lot of it, I think, is we're taking 10 steps back. We're trying to take, one step forward, but we're taking 10 steps back because honestly, we're, especially when it comes to flower as well, it's like, okay, understandably, under nice guidance, we can't license cannabis flower. It's really difficult. Does that mean that we should give up? And I
Mhm.
feel like the industry is starting to give up on flour. And that's why the pseudo rec market is starting to be built and created as if
Yeah.
it's like some sort of conspiracy or propaganda against flour.
Again, I think I'm trying to be fair here. I think it is genuine fear. I do understand there are patients that will be out there saying, "Look, I don't want to be lumped in with this, that, and the other. I don't want to look like this and that." But
Mhm.
this is the problem. Stop trying to add more restrictions to a patient, and maybe just educate the officers that don't know that you know uh, just how a controlled substance which isn't prescribed in a pill can look identical to one that is prescribed. It's the same with needles. It's the same with all these different ways of intaking a medicine. The only one they seem to not know is that flour can be prescribed and not prescribed. Do you see what I'm saying? They just
For
don't
sure.
seem to want to just educate the officers that it can be prescribed as a flower instead of trying to maybe get rid of the. I'm not trying to say they're trying to get rid of the flower, but it does feel like they're demonizing the flower at least.
Definitely, definitely. And I think they're also in turn demonizing the patients who are using the flower. And
Yeah.
it's not fair at all. Especially when we're all trying to, you know, receive a legitimate treatment. And we've all already, like a majority of us patients who have self-medicated have
Mhm.
already felt, have already been through this prejudice and stigma. And, the war on drugs has already created this like distrust against the government and the healthcare system. We don't want to continue to create that distrust within our own industry if we're trying to bring this out and help and support patients. So, I mean,
And and
go on.
on while we're talking about specifically these recommendations from the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, I want to try and be balanced a little bit here. If it wasn't for this society, I don't think we'd have as many clinicians trained in this sector, and thus not as many patients being prescribed the medicine. But there's something that I don't really talk about. Well, I haven't talked about a lot on my channel, and that is that I was a director of a member of the community of the medical cannabis clinician. Sorry, the medical cannabis patients association. Sorry, the MCPA, which was a campaign which was set up, founded by Sarah, who was on the last episode. And this is how I know Mohammed Ish. We've known each other for a long time through this, and we one of the things that I did when we were campaigning for the MCPA was I would attend regularly these meetings that the Cannabis Industry Council held, of which the MCPA was a member, which Patients Can is a member. Um, can you explain, one thing that really kind of added to my burnout around the industry was that these recommendations, which obviously we have objections to, was what was it signed off? It was co-signed. It was kind of what's it, endorsed? What's the correct word by the CIC?
Yeah, apparently it was reviewed and approved by the executive team at the CIC. I don't think any member of the CIC knew about this, were aware of this. Personally, I would not have accepted it. I would have
Mm-hmm.
said no. Um, but they did, and it's not much I can really say about that.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from what I feel like our organization would have said in that position if the members had been given the choice. It's disappointing, really, because I thought it was a shared voice.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get out, and that I think is, like you said, I'm disappointed to see because um, it didn't feel like every member and every voice was being heard at that moment in time. But how do you feel about the industry as a whole at the moment? I mean, again, I'm trying to be balanced here a little bit and not be too so doom and gloom. If I didn't have access to this system, then it's likely that I wouldn't be able to get this medicine just because of my condition and being anxious and everything like that. But how do you feel about where it's going? Do you feel like this is going to have, we've talked about a bit, but do you think this sort of thing is going to have negative repercussions on the industry, potentially with growers, with I mean, this is a bit broad here, but
Yeah. Firstly, I just want to emphasize what you said and share the same opinion about the organizations that we've mentioned. They've done great work,
yeah,
and because of them, we've come so as far as we have. Um, but I feel like it's it's creating a divide within our own community,
yeah,
and we're I feel like we're distancing ourselves from the real goal, and um, that is to increase patient numbers so that the government can actually, give us some attention, and not attention at the wrong time for the wrong reason, right? At the moment, they're giving us attention for the wrong reasons,
yeah,
which isn't what we really want. So I feel like there's a lot of work to be done to keep the community together. But everyone's got their own opinions, right? They've all got their own, I want to say agenda,
Mhm.
but the way that they see the medical cannabis industry shaped.
Yeah.
I think everyone's got their own way of seeing it. And like I mentioned before, if cannabis can't be licensed, then cannabis flower can't be licensed, then that may not be an option that we see in the future. It might be something that a lot of people just push for to get rid of. And maybe once we decriminalize it, it's just for the recreational side of things, even though that shouldn't be the case. Um, but yeah, I think personally, there's a lot of work to be done to keep the community together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just again, I want to emphasize. I mean, these may be the the. I still want to see a collaboration, and support between industry members and different campaigns. But I'm just saying that this sort of thing, it doesn't embolden patients and patient organizations is what I'm trying to get at. And
Mhm.
again, I again echo the points that you made, that again these organizations do contribute a lot. It's just that I think criticism is needed sometimes to ensure that we are, on the same page. We're loosely in agreement as to this industry not going one way or the other. Do you believe that we should be pushing towards NHS? Do you think we should have more of like a legal recreational sort of market like they have in Canada, or like they have in Germany, where it's a little more decriminalized, with like social clubs, etc., that sort of thing? Where do you think that the UK, what do you think is the best option for the UK moving forward?
The reason why cannabis was legalized in the UK was because of a couple of parents who were very persistent, and the government were kind of their hands were tied, and they had to legalize it. So
Mm-hmm.
this is why we're seeing a lot of lack of attention to this industry,
Yeah.
left to its own devices. Um, so I don't see the government trying to give any attention. Like we've already seen, the Labour government shows no interest towards
Mm-hmm.
decriminalising cannabis or improving it in any way for the country. So I don't see any change happening anytime soon, unless something like a massive legal case that comes in and sets precedent, and we have to decriminalize it. The government has to decriminalize it. I don't see anything happening like that until then. But personally, I would like to see cannabis decriminalized. I would like to see the grow your patients and the general public to be able to grow their own, but preferably patients to be able to grow their own medicines. Um, and
Is that the model you would be looking for? Full sort, just because I'm interested on the subject, I want to kind of understand everyone's opinions on it. So to be clear, how do you see that being modeled? Like I say, is it similar to sort of Germany and how they've done it with the social clubs? Or do you see that just like no industry involvement whatsoever, no sort of like, you know, legal market? It's all grow your own. And what would you say? Sorry.
I think it should be a mix of both,
Okay.
because it needs, like, we've got to remember that cannabis can also benefit the society. And to do that is to have businesses that are selling cannabis or within the cannabis space in some way. So we've already got some cannabis lounges in the UK, and some of them have gone for the harm reduction side. And I feel like that's how we should have our social clubs in the future. If we were to decriminalize and we had social clubs, we should utilize them as harm reduction centers as well as social clubs, so that people can go there, use their cannabis, have devices there so they don't have to smoke it, maybe have educational workshops to understand cannabis a bit better, having some sort of benefit for the society and the community to improve understanding of cannabis and the use of cannabis.
Yeah.
But in turn, I feel like medical cannabis should still exist, It should
Mhm.
exist in the NHS, and it should be available to those people that aren't confident about, and I'm going to use the word supplement cannabis by themselves.
Yeah.
Because I feel like cannabis, personally, I feel cannabis is a supplement and not a pharmaceutical drug. So it should be considered as an addition to someone's life, whether that's with their along with their fitness, their day-to-day living, their eating. It
Mhm.
should be just considered a supplement.
All fantastic points. I'm going to cut it there just because, as you can see, there's of course some choppiness here and there due to technical difficulties. But what we're going to do is we are going to go to a break now. Ish has just got his meds. I've got some new meds. We're going to take a break and have a bit more of an even franker conversation behind the scenes. So if you want to see that, then you have to click the join button below and become a member of the channel. But we'll see you there. And if not, we'll see you back for part two.